July 29th, 2026. Right now, rescue crews are still digging through the wreckage of a collapsed shopping mall in southern Japan, more than a full day after the ground stopped shaking. On Tuesday afternoon, a magnitude 7.1 earthquake tore through Kumamoto Prefecture on the island of Kyushu, collapsing part of a mall packed with shoppers and employees, triggering a brief tsunami alert along the coast and forcing roughly 300,000 people to evacuate their homes. As of this morning, at least 13 people are confirmed dead, dozens more remain missing, and Japan's prime minister has mobilized thousands of troops to help with search and rescue. So let's break down exactly what happened, why this particular stretch of Japan has now been hit by major earthquakes twice in a single decade, and what the next few days likely look like for the people still trapped and still searching. Drop a comment right now. If you've ever lived through an earthquake, tell me where you were and what it actually felt like in that first moment. And if you want to stay updated as this rescue effort develops over the coming days, subscribe to the channel. It's completely free, and a thumbs up helps this reach people who need to see it. Now let's get into what we actually know. At 4:27 in the afternoon local time on Tuesday, the ground beneath Kumamoto Prefecture ruptured violently. The Japan Meteorological Agency measured the earthquake at magnitude 7.1, while the United States Geological Survey put the figure slightly lower at 6.8. A common discrepancy that comes down to different measurement models rather than any disagreement about how destructive the event actually was. What both agencies agreed on was the depth. This was a shallow earthquake, striking from just over 6 miles beneath the surface, which meant almost none of that seismic energy had a chance to dissipate before it hit buildings, roads, and people directly overhead. On Japan's own Shindo intensity scale, which measures actual shaking intensity rather than the raw energy released at the source, the quake. Described the building swaying violently from side to side, saying she was certain it was going to come down and that everyone around her panicked in the moment. A significant aftershock followed roughly 40 minutes later, a magnitude 6.1, adding another jolt to a region already reeling from the main shock, and hundreds of smaller aftershocks have continued rattling the area since. The worst single point of destruction happened at the Aeon Mall in the town of Kashima, a large shopping center that would have been full of Tuesday afternoon shoppers and staff when the ground began to move. The second floor of the A mall collapsed during the earthquake, and shortly afterward, a major explosion tore through the structure, followed by fires breaking out inside the wreckage. Japan's public broadcaster NHK reported that between 20 and 30 mall employees could not be reached in the hours immediately following the collapse. As rescue crews worked through the debris overnight, 4 people were pulled out alive. But as of this morning, at least 10 more remain unaccounted for inside the ruins of the building. Fire officials described a considerable number of people feared trapped, and search teams have continued working through the wreckage in the hours since, cutting through collapsed concrete and twisted steel to reach anyone still alive inside. Beyond the mall itself, aerial footage from the region showed a cargo train derailed on its tracks, collapsed towers at an industrial paper mill in the nearby city of Yatsushiro, where multiple workers are also reported missing, and a smaller structure fully engulfed in flame elsewhere in the prefecture. Japan's Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi confirmed Wednesday morning that the death toll had risen to at least 13, cautioning that the total includes some deaths where the direct connection to the earthquake and its aftershocks is still being formally investigated. More than 100 people have been reported injured across the region, many suffering fractures and other injuries from falling furniture and debris inside homes and offices as the shaking hit. At Seismic Kumamoto Hospital, a 400-bed facility in the south of the city, staff said they had already reached full capacity by Wednesday morning, with a steady stream of patients arriving with fractures from furniture that toppled during the quake. The hospital's own public relations director said the facility itself had sustained damage in the earthquake, even as it continued absorbing casualties, and the hospital temporarily suspended all non-emergency scheduled admissions, asking the public to avoid outpatient visits entirely unless it was a genuine emergency. Kumamoto's city government reported that more than 170 public facilities across the city, including libraries, community centers, and sports facilities, have been shut down, with a number of them converted instead into temporary evacuation shelters for displaced residents. In the minutes after the main shock, Japan's meteorological agency issued a tsunami advisory for the coastal areas nearest the epicenter, a standard precaution any time a shallow, powerful earthquake strikes near open water, since shallow ruptures are exactly the kind capable of displacing enough seafloor to generate dangerous waves, coastals. Residents in the affected area were told to move away from the shoreline and toward higher ground, while officials assessed the actual wave risk. Within a relatively short window, the advisory was lifted without any significant wave activity being recorded. which is genuinely the outcome you want in this kind of situation, but it doesn't mean the warning itself was an overreaction. Tsunami advisories exist precisely because you cannot know in the first few minutes after a quake whether the seafloor has shifted in a way that will generate a wave, and by the time you can know for certain, it may already be too late to evacuate. Issuing the warning immediately and lifting it once the danger has clearly passed is the system working exactly as intended, not a false alarm. Transportation and infrastructure across the region took a significant hit as well. High-speed Shinkansen train service through the affected area was suspended entirely in the hours after the quake. Kumamoto's airport shut down for several hours as crews inspected the runway and terminal for structural damage before reopening later Tuesday evening. Roads throughout the prefecture were closed in multiple locations, either from direct earthquake damage or from debris and downed infrastructure blocking the way, complicating both the evacuation of residents and the movement of emergency vehicles trying to reach the hardest hit areas. In response to a request from prefectural authorities, Japan's self-defense forces mobilized approximately 3,600 personnel to the region, working alongside police and fire crews on search and rescue, debris clearance, and support for the roughly 300,000 residents who were instructed to seek shelter at evacuation centers set up across the prefecture. To understand why Kumamoto specifically keeps finding itself at the center of Japan's most destructive earthquakes, you have to look at what's actually happening underground in this part of Kyushu, because this is not a random patch of geography that got unlucky twice. Kumamoto sits at the southern end of the Japan median tectonic line, the longest fault system in the entire country, at a point where that system splits into two separate active branches. This earthquake ruptured along the Hinagu Fault, an 81-kilometer fault line, along with interaction from the neighboring 64-kilometer Futagawa Fault to its north, with a 27-kilometer stretch of that northern fault sliding roughly 3.5 meters in the process. This is precisely the kind of complex multi-fault rupture system that seismologists watch most closely, because when two connected fault lines are capable of triggering each other, a single earthquake can effectively become a chain reaction rather than a single isolated event. If that phrase sounds familiar, it's because Kumamoto has been here before, and the parallel is almost impossible to ignore. Back in April of 2016, this exact region was struck by a sequence of major earthquakes just a day apart. A magnitude 6.5 hit the town of Mashiki on a Thursday night, and then, before the region had even begun to recover, a far larger magnitude 7.3 main shock struck the same area early Saturday morning, ultimately killing at least 48 people, injuring nearly 2,000, and destroying well over 1,000 homes in Mashiki alone. That sequence triggered devastating landslides in the nearby village of Minamiyaso, burying homes and roads under tons of displaced earth, and left more than 100,000 people homeless in the immediate aftermath, sleeping in shelters, cars, and gymnasiums for weeks afterward. What made that 2016 disaster so unusual at the time was the sequencing itself. A moderate quake, followed by an even larger one on the same fault system within 48 hours, something that genuinely confused the standard assumptions seismologists relied on for how aftershock sequences normally behave. 10 years later, almost to the week, the same fault network beneath Kumamoto has ruptured again, and while this week's earthquake so far appears to be a single event rather than a multi-day sequence like 2016, Japanese seismologists will be watching aftershock activity extremely closely over the coming days for any sign that a second, larger rupture could still be building, exactly the way it did a decade ago. It's worth being direct here about what earthquake science can and can't tell us in a moment like this. Nobody can predict with any precision whether Kumamoto will see another major shock in the coming days, the way it tragically did in 2016, or whether Tuesday's earthquake and its aftershocks will simply fade out over the next week, the way the overwhelming majority of aftershock sequences eventually do. What officials can do, and what Japanese authorities are actively doing right now, is treat every damaged building in the affected zone as potentially compromised and unsafe to re-enter until structural engineers have cleared it, keep evacuation centers open and stocked for as long as residents need them, and continue urging people in the region to stay alert to further shaking rather than assuming the danger has fully passed just because the initial quake is over. This is exactly the same caution that led the region's hospitals to temporarily halt non-urgent admissions and the city to close down public buildings rather than declare business as usual too early. There's also a broader context here worth understanding, because Japan experiences earthquakes at a scale that's genuinely difficult for people living outside the country to fully grasp. Japan sits at the convergence point of 4 major tectonic plates and experiences hundreds of felt earthquakes every single year, the overwhelming majority of which cause little to no damage at all. This is also a country with some of the strictest seismic building codes anywhere on the planet, codes that are continuously updated as new engineering research comes in, which is precisely why the vast majority of structures across Kyushu absorbed Tuesday's shaking without collapsing. The Aeon Mall collapse and the industrial damage in Yatsushiro stand out specifically because they are the exception in an otherwise well-engineered region, not the rule. That contrast matters because it's a reminder that even in a country as earthquake-prepared as Japan, a shallow, powerful rupture striking directly beneath a populated area can still find the specific structural weak points capable of causing real loss of life, no matter how strong the broader building code environment is. For anyone with family or friends in the Kumamoto region right now, the practical situation on the ground looks like this. Evacuation centers remain open across the prefecture for anyone whose home has been damaged or who simply doesn't feel safe returning yet, and city officials have said those centers will stay operational for as long as they're needed. Transportation is gradually coming back online, with the airport reopened and rail service being restored in stages, though delays and disruptions are likely to continue for at least the next several days as inspectors clear tracks and infrastructure section by section. If you're trying to reach someone in the affected area and can't get through by phone, that's consistent with what typically happens after a major earthquake, since cell networks frequently become overloaded with call volume even when the physical infrastructure itself is intact. And text messages or messaging apps often succeed even when voice calls are failing to connect. Japan's disaster relief networks, including the Red Cross and prefectural emergency services, are already coordinating support for displaced residents, and international rescue teams are among the resources being evaluated as the scale of the mall collapse. Search operation becomes clearer over the coming days. If you live in an earthquake-prone region anywhere in the world, and clearly a large percentage of people watching this do, Tuesday's earthquake is a useful, if painful, reminder of a few basic things worth actually doing rather than just thinking about. Know the safest place inside your home or workplace to shelter during shaking, generally under a sturdy piece of furniture away from windows and anything that could fall. Keep a basic emergency kit accessible, with water, a flashlight, any necessary medications, and a way to charge your phone even if the power goes out. If you live near a coastline, know your evacuation route to higher ground before you ever need it, because the minutes immediately after a shallow coastal earthquake are exactly when a tsunami advisory can go out with very little lead time. And have a communication plan with family members that doesn't depend entirely on phone calls going through, since that's often the first thing to become unreliable in the immediate aftermath of a major quake, exactly as families in Kumamoto are experiencing right now. Right now, the most urgent number in this entire story is 10, the number of people believed still trapped somewhere inside the wreckage of the Aeon Mall in Kashima. Every hour that passes changes the odds for the rescue teams working to reach them, and that search is going to remain the central focus in Kumamoto for as long as it takes. Beyond the mall, thousands of residents are still living in evacuation centers. Hospitals are still operating under significant strain, and seismologists are still watching aftershock activity closely given what happened here in 2016. We'll keep tracking this as new information comes in, the final outcome of the mall rescue operation, any updates to the death toll, and whether this region sees any further significant aftershocks in the days ahead. Subscribe so you don't miss those updates, and drop that comment below. Have you ever lived through an earthquake? And what did that first moment actually feel like for you? See you in the next one.